So let's talk about this Kamehameha Schools admission policy challenge that has come up in recent weeks. There's been a lot said, and I just wanted to share my opinion as a local born and raised in Hawaii. And if you're expecting a loud rant from an angry Hawaiian, this isn't the video for you. If you're not familiar with what's happening, Students for Fair Admission, a mainline group whose lawsuit against Harvard University ended affirmative action in college admissions, is challenging the admission policy of Kamehameha Schools, more specifically the preference for Native Hawaiian students. And just to be upfront, I do support Kamehameha Schools in this situation, but I also want to be somewhat critical of what others in the space of public opinion may be saying to support them. Because while I understand that people may state their knee-jerk reaction to the headlines of these stories and provide flippant comments, I think it hurts rather than strengthens Kamehameha Schools' position. As locals, when we read headlines like "Nonprofit targets Kamehameha Schools 140-year admission policy," it's really easy to feel like it's a personal attack. And for some, particularly those who graduated from Kamehameha or have ties to the school, it's a very reasonable reaction. I remember when there were talks of making changes to my former high school, my initial reaction was wanting to be protective, maybe even a little bit defensive. But rather than reacting to the headlines, I think it's more prudent to at least listen, or in this case, read what the other side is saying, not to jump to conclusions, and especially not to resort to name calling or making race-based jokes or comments about how haoles are doing it again, because that doesn't contribute to the discussion. And I want to spend some time talking about this because frankly, I think retreating to race-based name calling in any form indicates that you've run out of reasons in your argument. And so you have to resort to some juvenile tactics to make your point. But you're never going to win because you aren't making any points. You're just making racial comments. Because none of that type of name calling matters on a larger national scale. I know it's hard for some people in Hawaii to understand this, but if you spent some time on the mainland, you know where Hawaii is situated. You know how little people think of Hawaii, and we're not the center of the entire world. We're not the center of the entire universe. And I know that people know that, but sometimes it's easy to forget when you live on an island in the middle of the Pacific. Excuse me. So if you're going to continue to stoop down to using haole this or haole that, it doesn't have the same connotation as it would here in Hawaii. It also doesn't matter that this group is from Virginia. They could be from wherever. And it also doesn't matter what political administration we are currently under. So I don't see the point in making this situation about those things. I think sometimes people use situations like this to express their greater frustration for other systemic things that they have no control over. And so everything becomes a fight against fill in the blank. But that's not what we're here to talk about. That's not what this issue is about. In fact, I think about the film 12 Angry Men, and in that film there's this scene where one of the jurors is just spewing all of this hate and prejudice against the defendant, and all the other jurors at the table, they're just tired of it, and they one by one step away from the table. They let him rant and finish, and I think he realizes that his position is not the position of the group that he represents, and really it's quite sad. And sometimes I feel like that when I read those types of comments online. I feel like although I may support the position that they're on, I just don't want to hear it. And symbolically, I feel like just walking off into the corner somewhere and just waiting for them to be done, and for them to just stop talking. So I just wanted to put that out there. But let's look at what the opposing side is saying first. And so this is from the Students for Fair Admissions website. I want to read their statement and we'll go through it and sort of talk about it here. So first, Kamehameha Schools is a great school system. Yes, that's true. The education that is afforded to its students is, from what I hear, really great. And not just the food at the cafeteria, but also the other cultural aspects of education there are well resourced. It may not be at the same level as some of the other elite private schools that we have here, but I think it's safe to say that there's no other educational experience like what you can find at Kamehameha anywhere else in the state. And so I think that it's fair that we can agree on this point, that Kamehameha Schools is a great school system. But let's continue. But its admissions policy expressly prefers students with Native Hawaiian ancestry over non-Native Hawaiian students. That's also true. While being Native Hawaiian is not a requirement, there is a preference. I don't think we can argue that there isn't one. I don't think it's like a big secret. Of the 7,231 students under the Kamehameha Schools in 2024, I'm not sure you'd find one who isn't Native Hawaiian. And maybe there are some students, we just don't know about that. That's not really disclosed. But since I can remember way back growing up, the assumption is that all students at Kamehameha have some Hawaiian ancestry. And so see, we can find points of agreement here. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. So continuing, in fact, that preference is so strong that it is essentially impossible for a non-Native Hawaiian student to be admitted to Kamehameha. I would also agree with this statement. There was Kalani Roselle, who was admitted back in the 2000s, a non-Hawaiian student who attended Kamehameha. And I remember it was a big deal back then. I was back in high school. But even after that, the floodgate of non-Native Hawaiians getting in didn't really happen. I'm not even sure what resulted of that. I don't think much changed. So yes, it's essentially impossible for a non-Hawaiian student to be admitted. I think that's a reasonable statement that I could agree with, and I think most people could also agree with. So far, there's nothing that I would blatantly disagree with. But let's continue. We believe that focus on ancestry rather than merit or need is neither fair nor legal. Now, this is a big statement. This is what I think is the heart of this entire issue and what people should be focused on. So first, we believe means opinion and not fact. It also does not mean personal attack. It just means that this is what someone thinks. And what someone thinks should be defendable with sound reasoning. And in this case, that is up to this organization to make their case, while Kamehameha Schools will have to counter with their own reasoning. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we're all talking about opinion here, and people are entitled to differing opinions. Now, a focus on ancestry rather than merit or need is a tricky phrase in this context that I don't think is entirely accurate. Sure, with a preference for Native Hawaiian students, there is at least a little focus on ancestry. However, the Kamehameha Schools application doesn't solely look at that. In fact, I think merit is something that is considered as well as need. For example, I remember when I was a kid, I had a friend who was trying to get into Kamehameha for golf. I mean, he was a really amazing golfer, and when his parents applied, they really pushed that he was an excellent golfer. Now, obviously, they don't have golf scholarships at high school, but the fact that he was one of the best golfers in the state definitely did not hurt his application, and he ultimately made their golf team better. And I think you can find other examples where merit is also heavily considered, particularly when you get into the high school age. And as far as need is concerned, I believe that they do consider need and the financial situation of applicants and their families. And need doesn't just mean income or how much money somebody makes. It could mean that the student is on a neighbor island and doesn't have access to certain educational opportunities there. So while the Native Hawaiian ancestry piece does get highlighted, I don't think it's the main focus. I think there are other things in consideration. I mean, sure, while being Native Hawaiian is a factor, I don't think that's just it, as implied by the term focus. Nor do I think merit and need are excluded from consideration, as is implied by the phrase rather than. If that was the case, every Native Hawaiian student in the state would be enrolled at Kamehameha, and that's just not the case. But let's talk about fair and legal, because those are very interesting Those are very interesting terms here. In terms of fairness, it's all relative. I mean, is it fair that my kids don't have a chance to really go to Kamehameha schools? Me being non-Hawaiian, my wife also being non-Hawaiian. And personally, I think that's fine. But for others, they may feel like that's not fair. And I understand that position. I mean, you gotta remember, we're talking about Hawaii here, a place where there is a big divide between public and private school, where some parents will do anything to make sure that their kids go to private school and don't have to go to public school. Because sometimes in Hawaii, where you send your kid to school has a big impact on the success that they may have here in the state. Because where you graduate from here has important social significance. Even if most people outside of Hawaii don't even care, it matters in Hawaii. But going back to fairness, I think the people who think the admissions policy is unfair aren't people like me, like non-Native Hawaiians. I'm sure there are some, but actually, in thinking about this more, I would think it's actually the parents who are Native Hawaiian, but their child was denied admission. I mean, you want to talk about unfairness. I actually think it's a little unfair that not all Native Hawaiian kids can go to Kamehameha schools. And Kamehameha may not be the best school for everyone because, let's face it, not all the kids want to be in private school who are attending private school. Sometimes they're forced to go. But I think for those kids who want to go, for the parents who want to send their kids there, it's too bad that all the kids can't attend. The Bishop estate is valued at like $15 billion. And you'd think with that much money, there would be a way to increase enrollment. And maybe they have been increasing enrollment over the years. I haven't looked at the numbers, but is it moving towards that point where all Native Hawaiian kids have the opportunity for that education? Or again, is it who you know? Is it who your auntie was? Who your grandpa was? I'm not so sure, but I hope that they're moving toward that. But let's talk about legal, because legal is the more important aspect here. That's really what this is about. Because while fairness results in hurt feelings, the legality of something has real consequences. And this is for our courts to decide. There is already precedent with Kamehameha Schools admission policy, which sided with them in the past in the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in the 2000s. But with a vote of 8-7 in favor of Kamehameha Schools, that's as close as you're going to get to losing. I'm not sure what's going to happen these days, especially if this gets kicked around and ends up in the Supreme Court. So we'll just have to see. But those challenges in the past were typically from individuals and nothing like what this organization is like. I mean, this is a pretty big entity. I'm reminded of this scene in the movie The Prince of Egypt when Moses' staff turns into a snake, and then the Egyptian magicians sing this song called Playing with the Big Boys. And it's this huge production just to turn their staffs into snakes. And it makes me laugh because they put so much effort into something that really didn't need it, but the message is there. You're playing with the big boys now. And in that light, Kamehameha Schools is playing with the big boys now. And I look forward to seeing what their defense will be and how all of this plays out. I think sometimes in Hawaii, we get comfortable with how things are. We sometimes get too comfortable that these things, ideas, ways of life become institutionalized. And while there is value in that at times, every now and then I actually think it's good to be challenged in a healthy way. If right is on your side, you have nothing to worry about except the legal fees, I suppose. I know it's highlighted that this is a 140-year admission policy. Maybe it's time that it does become refined and that they take a look at it again. And I'm not suggesting that they allow non-Native Hawaiian students, but maybe they should take a look at the policy and see if there are ways to modernize it to today's times, to reevaluate whether its admission policies adhere to the mission of what was outlined in Bernice Pauahi Bishop's will. I'm also a believer in seeing these challenges to one's beliefs as an opportunity to better understand oneself. We take a lot of things for granted based on assumptions that may or may not be true. And when we're challenged for those beliefs, we are forced to think about why we believe in the things that we believe. And so if this admission policy is being challenged and the defense is that the school is supposed to lift up students of Native Hawaiian descent, what was that happening? And I'm not just talking about K through 12, but is that carrying on into adulthood? And I can't answer that question, but I think it's something to reflect on. I read over the recent resolution 25-280 from the Honolulu City Council about supporting the Kamehameha Schools admission policy. Among other things, the resolution calls for the city and state of Hawaii to stand united on this issue. That's a tough request, to call on all of us to stand united on anything these days. The only time that seems to happen is if someone from Hawaii is on American Idol or Hawaii has a team in the Little League World Series. But speaking for myself, I do support the admission policy, even as a non-Native Hawaiian, and as a local. I also understand, or am at least trying to understand, the perspective of those trying to challenge this policy. I don't think that this issue needs to create an us versus them mentality. I think we can talk about this issue with respect and decency and understanding, while still maintaining a firm foundation in our beliefs, whatever they may be. And I thought it appropriate to end with Bernice Pauahi Bishop's own words directly from her will. I give, devise, and bequeath all of the rest, residue and remainder of my estate, real and personal, wherever situated, unto the trustees below named, their heirs and assigns forever, to hold upon the following trusts, namely, to erect and maintain in the Hawaiian Islands 2 schools, each for boarding and day scholars, 1 for boys and 1 for girls, to be known as and called the Kamehameha Schools. I direct my trustees to expend such amount as they may deem best, not to exceed, however, 1/2 of the fund which may come into their hands in the purchase of suitable premises, the erection of the school buildings, and in furnishing the same with the necessary and appropriate fixtures, furniture, and apparatus. I direct my trustees to invest the remainder of my estate in such manner as they may think best, and to expend the annual income in the maintenance of said schools, meaning thereby the salaries of teachers, the repairing buildings and other incidental expenses, and to devote a portion of each year's income to the support and education of orphans and others in indigent circumstances, giving the preference to Hawaiians of pure or part Aboriginal blood. The proportion in which said annual income is to be divided among the various objects above mentioned to be determined solely by my said trustees, they to have full discretion. I desire my trustees to provide first and chiefly a good education in the common English branches, and also instruction in morals and in such useful knowledge as may tend to make good and industrious men and women. And I desire instruction in the higher branches to be subsidiary to the foregoing objects. So thanks for watching, and aloha.
Hello.